Behind every murder case, there are always two stories. One is the story the killer wants everyone to believe, and the other is hidden within the small details that most people never notice. Our task is to follow those details until the second and real story finally comes into the light. And now let us open the case file of today's story. I hope you all have a deeply engaging and unforgettable listening experience. Late in the afternoon of a quiet day in May 2012, the fields surrounding Baishujiang village lay almost completely still beneath the pale northern sky. The land here, tucked deep within Pingshan County of Hebei Province, was known for its strange climate. Winters arrived brutally early and lingered long after most of northern China had begun to thaw. Temperatures often plunged far below freezing, sometimes reaching -16 degrees Celsius, turning streams into ice and leaving the earth hardened for months. Even in late spring, the air still carried a faint chill that lingered in the shadows of abandoned farmland. For the people who lived here, life moved slowly, shaped by the rhythm of the seasons and the quiet isolation of the countryside. That afternoon, a local farmer named Mr. Zhang had been working alone in his field for hours, tending to the rows of crops that struggled to grow in the stubborn soil. By midday, the sun had climbed high enough to warm the air, and the long hours of labor began to leave him exhausted and thirsty. The small bottle of water he had brought with him was already empty, drained earlier in the afternoon while he worked beneath the steady glare of the sun. Normally, he would have returned home to refill it, but the nearest house was nearly a kilometer away, and the thought of making the long walk across the fields felt unnecessarily tiring. Instead, he remembered something nearby. Not far from the edge of the farmland stood an old well that villagers occasionally used when irrigation water ran short. It was an unusual structure, wide and deep, dug many years earlier when the village had fewer modern water systems. Large rectangular stones had been embedded into the inner wall of the well-like steps, allowing a person to carefully climb down if the water level became too low. The opening itself was wide, nearly 15 meters across, and the shaft extended almost 20 meters into the earth. Most villagers knew about it, but because it sat slightly hidden among uneven ground and tall weeds, people rarely visited unless they had a specific reason. Driven mostly by thirst, Mr. Zhang made his way toward the well, carrying his empty bottle. As he approached, he leaned forward and peered down into the opening. The water at the bottom appeared cloudy, tinted with a faint yellow-brown color from the soil below. It did not look particularly clean, but in the past he had occasionally used water from this same well to irrigate crops. At that moment, thirst mattered more than clarity. Carefully stepping onto the stone footholds carved into the wall, he began climbing down the interior of the well. Each step echoed faintly against the stone surface as he descended closer to the water below. When he finally reached a point near the surface, he crouched down and dipped his bottle into the murky water, scooping up enough for a quick drink. But the moment he took his first sip, something felt wrong. There was a faint metallic taste in the water, accompanied by a strange smell that reminded him of rust or something slightly rotten. Mr. Zhang paused, lowering the bottle and staring at the surface in confusion. It was then that his eyes caught something unusual, drifting beneath the cloudy water several meters away. At first, it appeared to be nothing more than a pale object suspended in the murk, barely visible through the yellowish water. The shape moved gently with the slow motion of the liquid, rising and falling slightly as if floating somewhere just below the surface. From his position along the wall of the well, the object sat perhaps 7 or 8 meters away, too far to immediately identify. He narrowed his eyes and leaned forward, trying to focus. For a moment, he considered the possibility that it might simply be trash, perhaps a discarded mannequin or some piece of cloth that had been thrown into the well. It would not have been the first time someone had dumped something strange there, but as the object slowly shifted beneath the water, a different detail became visible. Something about the shape looked disturbingly familiar. There, just beneath the cloudy surface, was what looked unmistakably like a human hand. The skin appeared pale and swollen, its fingers faintly curled as it drifted in the water. For a second, Mr. Zhang's mind refused to process what he was seeing. The image seemed unreal, as if his eyes were playing tricks on him in the dim light reflecting off the well walls. Then the realization hit him all at once. His body froze. The bottle slipped from his hand and splashed quietly into the water below, as a sudden wave of fear surged through him. Without thinking, he scrambled back toward the stone steps, climbing upward as fast as he could, his shoes scraping against the rough rock as he rushed out of the well. By the time he reached the surface, his heart was pounding violently in his chest. Standing at the edge of the opening, he took several steps back, staring down into the darkness below, as if expecting the thing to move again. For several seconds, the farmland around him remained silent. Then Mr. Zhang pulled out his phone and dialed the police. Within a short time, officers from the local station arrived at the scene. After listening to the farmer's nervous explanation, one officer removed his uniform jacket and carefully descended into the well to examine the object. The moment he approached it, any lingering doubt disappeared. Floating beneath the water was indeed a human body. What the villagers had unknowingly passed by for months was not simply an abandoned well, but the hidden resting place of a woman who had vanished from the village more than half a year earlier. At that moment, none of them yet understood that the quiet farmland of Baishujiang was about to reveal a crime rooted not in strangers or distant threats, but in jealousy, humiliation, and a relationship that had quietly spiraled out of control long before anyone realized something was wrong. And the deeper investigators would look into the life of the woman found in that well, the more complicated the truth would become. The recovery of the body from the village well quickly transformed what had once been a quiet rural afternoon into the beginning of a murder investigation. As police carefully lifted the remains onto a makeshift wooden platform and pulled it slowly up from the depths of the well, the small crowd of villagers standing at a distance watched in uneasy silence. The water that drained from the body carried with it the unmistakable signs of long submersion. Even without a full forensic examination, it was immediately clear that whoever this woman had been, she had not entered the well by accident. The body belonged to an adult female. Thick rope had been tightly wrapped around the torso, securing it to a large stone that investigators later estimated weighed close to 46 kilograms. The purpose was obvious. Whoever placed her there had not simply wanted to hide the body, they had intended to make absolutely certain it would never rise to the surface. Yet despite the months that had passed, investigators noticed something unusual about the condition of the remains. Normally, a body submerged in water for half a year would show extreme decomposition. In some cases, very little identifiable tissue would remain at all. But the forensic team quickly realized that the harsh climate of Hebei province had played an unexpected role in preserving the evidence. The woman had most likely died at the end of autumn, just as the region was entering its long freezing winter. For several months, the surface of the well had likely been covered by a thick layer of ice, turning the cold water below into something resembling a natural freezer. The freezing temperatures slowed the process of decay dramatically, allowing parts of the body to remain intact far longer than investigators would normally expect. That detail would later prove critical. But before determining how she died, investigators needed to answer a simpler question. Who was she? Word of the discovery spread quickly through Baishujiang village. In places like this, where the population was small and most residents had known one another for years, the appearance of an unidentified body was not just alarming, it was deeply personal. Within hours, police began comparing the discovery with recent missing person reports, and almost immediately one name surfaced. 7 months earlier, a woman from the same village had vanished without explanation. Her name was An Ping, and she was 36 years old. When officers contacted her family and asked them to come to the scene, the atmosphere became noticeably heavier. Her husband and older sister arrived shortly afterward, both visibly shaken. Although the condition of the body made identification difficult, certain details stood out immediately. The clothing matched the outfit Ping had been wearing around the time she disappeared. Even so, both relatives hesitated when police asked them to confirm the identity. It was not uncommon for families to react this way. Faced with the sudden possibility that a loved one had suffered such a violent fate, the mind often resisted accepting the reality of what was in front of them. Denial became a kind of emotional defense, a final barrier before the truth fully settled in. But science would soon remove any doubt. DNA testing later confirmed what many investigators already suspected. The woman found at the bottom of the well was indeed Ping. And with that confirmation, a missing person case that had remained unresolved for months suddenly became something far more serious. It became a homicide investigation. To understand what might have happened to Ping, investigators began looking closely at her life in the months leading up to her disappearance. On the surface, her story seemed fairly ordinary for a woman living in a small rural village. She had grown up in the area and over the years had been married more than once. By the time of her disappearance, she was living with her third husband, a man named Zhao Chengkui. Zhao worked far from home in a coal mine located in another province. Like many laborers from rural northern China, he spent most of the year away from his village, returning only occasionally during holidays or brief periods of leave. The arrangement was difficult, but it was common. Jobs in remote mines offered one of the few reliable sources of income for men from small agricultural communities. Because of this, Ping spent much of her time living alone in the village house they shared. According to neighbors, Zhao regularly sent money home to support her. By most accounts, the couple maintained regular contact through phone calls, often speaking daily despite the distance between them. From the outside, their relationship appeared stable, even affectionate. But the reality of life in the village was rarely as simple as it appeared. Several residents quietly told investigators that Ping was known for attracting attention. Even in her mid-30s, she was still considered an attractive woman by local standards. Over the years, she had been the subject of occasional gossip. Whispers about complicated relationships, rumors of flirtations, and speculation that she may have maintained close friendships with several men in the village. None of these stories had ever been formally confirmed, and gossip in small communities often carried more exaggeration than truth. Still, investigators understood that such dynamics could sometimes create hidden tensions beneath the surface of everyday life. More importantly, something about the timeline of her disappearance already raised troubling questions. According to records provided by her family, the last confirmed contact with Ping occurred in late September of the previous year. On the evening before she vanished, a neighbor reported seeing her sitting outside her house casually preparing vegetables, just as she had done countless times before. Nothing about her behavior that evening appeared unusual, but by the following day, she was gone. Her husband had been the first to notice something was wrong. After repeatedly attempting to call her phone without success, he contacted relatives in the village and asked them to check on her. When family members arrived at the house, they discovered something strange. The door was closed. Inside, many of her belongings were still there. Her favorite black handbag, something she rarely left home without, hung untouched on a hook inside the house. Personal items that would normally accompany someone leaving for travel remained exactly where they had been before. At first glance, it did not look like the home of someone who had voluntarily walked away from her life. Yet strangely, the disappearance was not immediately reported to the police. Instead, her family spent several days searching on their own, walking through nearby fields and asking neighbors if anyone had seen her. This delay would later become one of the most frustrating aspects of the investigation, because by the time police were finally contacted, something inside the house had already been changed, and the man responsible for those changes was the one person investigators would soon find themselves questioning most closely: Ping's husband. When investigators began reconstructing the events surrounding Ping's disappearance, one person naturally became the center of their attention almost immediately. In cases involving missing spouses, statistics alone often lead police to start with the individual closest to the victim. It was not an accusation at first, but rather a necessary step in narrowing the possibilities. That person was Ping's husband, Zhao Chengkui. At the time of her disappearance in late September 2011, Zhao had been working hundreds of kilometers away in a coal mine located in Shanxi province. Like many migrant laborers from rural villages, he spent most of the year living in cramped dormitories near the mining site, returning home only occasionally when work schedules allowed. According to phone records and employment logs provided by the mining company, Zhao had indeed been present at the mine during the critical period when Ping was last seen alive. Multiple co-workers confirmed that he had been working his normal shifts on both September 24th and the following morning. On paper, it appeared to be a solid alibi, but investigators quickly discovered something that complicated the situation. Inside the couple's home, police found a small but unmistakable detail that raised immediate concern. There was blood on the bed frame. The stain was faint, almost easy to overlook, but once discovered, it changed the tone of the entire investigation. In a case where a woman had vanished without explanation, the presence of blood inside her bedroom suggested that something violent might have taken place there. Even more troubling was what had happened inside the house before police arrived. During the days that Ping was missing, while relatives and neighbors were searching through the village, Zhao Chengkui had quietly cleaned the entire bedroom. The bed sheets had been removed and washed. The blankets had been replaced. Parts of the room had been wiped down, leaving investigators with the unsettling possibility that important forensic evidence had been destroyed before anyone even realized a crime might have occurred. For detectives, this created a disturbing contradiction. If Zhao truly believed his wife had simply gone somewhere temporarily, why would he feel the need to clean the room so thoroughly? And if he suspected something more serious had happened, why had he not contacted the police immediately? When officers confronted Zhao with these questions, his answers were hesitant and uneasy. At first, he struggled to explain his behavior in a way that satisfied investigators. His reluctance to report his wife missing, combined with the cleaning of the room, made him appear deeply suspicious. But the situation was not as straightforward as it seemed. After further questioning, Zhao eventually revealed something that had influenced his decisions during those crucial days. Several days before Ping disappeared, he had received an unexpected phone call from a relative living in the same village. The caller was a distant cousin named Zhang Lim. According to Zhao, the conversation had been brief but unsettling. Zhang had warned him that if he did not return home soon and keep an eye on his wife, there was a chance she might run away with another man. At the time, Zhao dismissed the statement as drunken nonsense. Zhang Lim had a reputation in the village for drinking heavily and making exaggerated claims while intoxicated. Angered by the accusation, Zhao reportedly scolded him over the phone before ending the conversation, but the comment lingered in his mind. So when Zhao later discovered that he could no longer reach Ping by phone, the memory of that call resurfaced almost immediately. As the hours passed without any contact from his wife, a painful possibility began to take shape in his thoughts. He wondered whether she might have chosen to leave him, perhaps even with someone else. For Zhao, the situation carried a heavy emotional weight. Not only was he a man who had spent years working dangerous shifts in coal mines to support his household, but he also came from a culture where public reputation within the village mattered deeply. The idea that his wife might have abandoned him for another man was not just personally devastating, it was humiliating, and humiliation can influence people in unexpected ways. According to Zhao's later testimony, this fear of public shame was exactly what prevented him from reporting the disappearance to the police immediately. He believed that if authorities began investigating, rumors about his wife's relationships might spread throughout the village. The possibility of becoming the subject of gossip, of being seen as the man whose wife had run away, was something he desperately wanted to avoid. So instead of calling the police, he chose to wait. He searched quietly with relatives, hoping that Ping might simply return on her own. And when he entered the house and saw signs that suggested a confrontation might have taken place, the disturbed bedding, the faint blood on the frame, his mind reached a different conclusion entirely. He believed the scene might have been staged. In Zhao's mind, the blood and the disarray were not evidence of violence, but rather part of an attempt by Ping to make it appear that something terrible had happened to her. He convinced himself that she had fabricated the scene to discourage him from searching for her after she left with someone else. It was a theory built more on emotion than evidence, but in the moment, it felt believable to him. Acting on that belief, Zhao cleaned the room. He washed the sheets, removed the signs of struggle, and restored the house to what he thought it had looked like before the incident. If his wife had truly left him, he reasoned, there was no need for outsiders to see the scene she had created. Unfortunately, this decision would later become one of the most damaging mistakes in the investigation, because when police eventually examined the house and discovered the small blood stain still remaining on the bed frame, it raised far more questions than answers. The forensic team collected a sample and sent it for laboratory testing. The result was definitive. The blood belonged to Ping. At that moment, the possibility that she had simply run away began to collapse. If her blood had been spilled inside the house, something far more serious must have occurred there. And with the crime scene already partially destroyed, investigators now faced a much more difficult task. They had a missing woman, a contaminated crime scene, and a husband whose actions, though perhaps driven by fear rather than guilt, had erased crucial evidence. For a time, the investigation stalled. Without a body and without additional physical clues, the case could not move forward as a homicide. It remained classified only as a disappearance, suspended in uncertainty while detectives continued searching for new leads. But there was still one detail that refused to fade from the investigators' minds: the phone call, the strange warning from Zhang Lim, the cousin who had insisted that An Ping might run away with another man. At the time, it had seemed like drunken gossip, yet the timing of that call, arriving just days before the woman vanished, now appeared far less coincidental. And when detectives attempted to speak with Zhang again, they discovered something unexpected. He was no longer in the village. When investigators returned to Baishujiang village to follow up on the strange phone call Zhao Chenghui had received, they quickly noticed something unusual. The man who had made that call, Zhang Lim, was suddenly nowhere to be found. At first, villagers gave vague answers about his whereabouts. Some said he had gone to work in another town. Others claimed he had simply left the village for a few days to visit relatives. But no one could give police a clear explanation of when he had left or where exactly he had gone. For detectives, that kind of uncertainty immediately raised suspicion. In small rural communities, people rarely disappear without others noticing. Villagers usually know who is working in nearby cities, who has traveled for family matters, and who has simply gone out of town for a few days. Yet in Zhang Lim's case, the answers felt strangely inconsistent. Investigators soon learned that Zhang was not just a distant cousin of Zhao Chenghui. He had grown up in the same village and had known An Ping for many years. Like Zhao, he also spent long periods working away from home as a laborer, returning to the village occasionally between jobs. More importantly, several residents quietly admitted something that no one had mentioned before. Zhang Liam and An Ping had once been very close. The nature of that relationship was difficult to define precisely. Some villagers described them as old friends who often talked together when Zhang returned home. Others hinted that their relationship might have been more intimate at certain points in the past. As with many rumors circulating in a small community, separating fact from exaggeration proved challenging. But the possibility of a personal connection between them immediately made the earlier phone call far more significant. If Zhang truly believed An Ping might run away with another man, how would he know that? And why would he feel the need to warn Zhao about it? Investigators decided to examine Zhang's movements more closely around the time of An Ping's disappearance. What they discovered only deepened the mystery. According to several villagers, Zhang had been seen in Baishujiang village on the evening of September 24th, the very same night that An Ping was last seen alive. A few people even remembered spotting him walking near the road that passed by her house late that evening. At the time, no one thought much of it. Zhang was known to visit the village occasionally, and there was nothing unusual about him walking through the area. But in the context of the investigation, the timing was impossible to ignore. Even more concerning was what happened afterward. Within days of An Ping vanishing, Zhang also disappeared from the village. Unlike Zhao Chenghui, who had remained in contact with relatives and continued working at the coal mine, Zhang seemed to have cut off nearly all communication. His phone was rarely active, and when investigators attempted to locate him through official employment records, they discovered that he had not registered for work at any nearby construction sites or factories. It was as if he had deliberately tried to avoid being found. Police eventually tracked him down several weeks later in a neighboring county. When officers arrived to question him, Zhang appeared surprised, but not particularly alarmed. He agreed to speak with investigators and denied having any involvement in An Ping's disappearance. According to his statement, he had simply left the village to look for temporary work elsewhere. When detectives asked about the phone call he had made to Zhao Chenghui, Zhang shrugged it off casually. He claimed he had only been joking. Zhang explained that he had been drinking that evening and had called Zhao out of boredom. The comment about An Ping possibly running away, he said, was nothing more than drunken teasing, an attempt to provoke Zhao for amusement. He insisted there had been no deeper meaning behind it, but detectives were not convinced. The timing of the call, combined with Zhang's sudden departure from the village, made his explanation difficult to accept. Still, suspicion alone was not enough to charge someone with a crime. Without physical evidence linking him to An Ping's disappearance, investigators had little choice but to release him after questioning. For months afterward, the case remained unresolved. With no body and no definitive proof of violence beyond the small bloodstain inside the house, police could not formally classify the disappearance as a homicide. The investigation gradually lost momentum as time passed and new cases demanded attention. In Baishujiang village, life slowly returned to its normal rhythm. But the mystery of Enping's disappearance never truly faded. Her family continued to search for answers, and whispers about the case persisted among villagers. Some believed she had indeed run away to start a new life somewhere far away. Others suspected something far darker had occurred, but without evidence, those suspicions remained nothing more than speculation. Then, 7 months later, the discovery of the body in the abandoned well changed everything. What had once been a missing person case was now unquestionably a murder investigation. The ropes tied around the body, the heavy stone meant to keep it submerged, and the location of the well itself all pointed to one unavoidable conclusion. Someone had deliberately killed Enping and tried to hide the evidence. And with the body finally recovered, forensic investigators were now able to examine injuries that had been impossible to confirm before. The results of that examination would soon reveal something chilling, because the marks found on Enping's neck suggested a very specific cause of death. She had been strangled, and the pattern of those marks indicated that whoever killed her had been standing extremely close enough to use their own hands. The forensic examination of Enping's body began shortly after it was transported to the county medical examiner's facility. Although the long period of submersion had affected the condition of the remains, investigators were relieved to discover that the cold winter months had preserved more evidence than they initially expected. The most important findings were located around the neck. Forensic specialists observed clear signs of compression injuries consistent with strangulation. The muscles and soft tissue around the throat showed damage that suggested powerful external pressure had been applied for an extended period of time. In addition, faint but recognizable patterns on the skin indicated that the pressure had most likely come from human hands rather than a rope or other tool. This meant that Enping had not been accidentally killed during a struggle. Whoever ended her life had done so deliberately, using direct force. The forensic team also examined the rope that had been tied around her body. The knots were tight and carefully secured, suggesting that the person who bound the body had taken time to ensure the weight of the stone would keep it submerged. The method used was not especially complex, but it demonstrated a level of planning rather than panic. In other words, the person responsible had likely remained calm enough after the killing to conceal the body in a calculated way. Investigators now faced a clearer picture of what had happened. Enping had almost certainly been killed somewhere on land, likely inside or near her home. Afterward, her body had been transported to the abandoned well and tied to a heavy stone in an attempt to hide the crime permanently. But this conclusion only raised a new and troubling question. Who had the opportunity to do it? Zhao Chengkui, the husband, still technically remained a suspect. The blood discovered in the bedroom and his decision to clean the room before reporting his wife missing continued to cast a shadow over his statements. However, the timeline investigators had reconstructed made it increasingly difficult to place him at the scene of the murder. Employment records from the coal mine showed that Zhao had been working his scheduled shifts during the period when Enping was last seen alive. Several co-workers confirmed that he had been present at the mine both the night before and the morning after her disappearance. Travel records also indicated that it would have been nearly impossible for him to secretly return to the village, commit the crime, and then return to work without anyone noticing. As detectives reviewed these details again, Zhao's involvement began to appear less likely. Their attention gradually shifted back to another figure whose actions remained difficult to explain. Zhang Lim, the man who had made the strange warning phone call, the man who had been seen near Enping's house on the night she disappeared, and the man who had quietly left the village shortly afterward. When investigators reopened the file after the body was discovered, Zhang immediately returned to the top of their list. This time, however, detectives approached the questioning differently. Rather than accusing him directly, they focused on reconstructing his exact movements on the evening of September 24th. They spoke with villagers again, revisiting earlier statements and searching for small details that might have been overlooked during the initial investigation. One elderly resident eventually remembered something that no one had considered important before. On that evening, just after sunset, she had seen Zhang standing outside Enping's house. At the time, the two appeared to be talking quietly near the doorway. The conversation did not look heated, but it seemed unusually private. The witness could not hear what they were saying, and she had continued walking without giving it much thought. But now, months later, the memory suddenly carried far greater weight. Investigators began to suspect that Wang may have been the last person to see Ping alive. When detectives confronted him again with this new information, his confidence appeared to shift slightly. His earlier explanation, that he had only visited the village briefly before leaving for work elsewhere, no longer matched the growing number of witness accounts placing him near her home that night. Still, Zhang continued to deny any involvement. He insisted that he had simply stopped by to chat with an old acquaintance before leaving the village. According to his version of events, the conversation had been short and entirely harmless. Afterward, he claimed he had gone home and then left the village the following morning, but investigators were not convinced. Something about Zhang's story felt incomplete. His answers often changed slightly when detectives asked the same question in different ways. Small inconsistencies began appearing in his timeline, details that did not fully align with what other villagers remembered. Yet despite the growing suspicion, detectives still faced the same frustrating problem. They had no direct evidence linking him to the killing. There were no fingerprints on the rope, no witnesses to a struggle, and no clear proof placing him at the well where the body had been hidden. Without that evidence, the case remained balanced on a fragile line between suspicion and certainty. The investigation might have remained stalled for much longer if not for one small discovery that detectives almost overlooked. It was something found not at the well and not inside Ping's house, but inside Zhang Lim's home. When investigators searched Zhang Lim's home more thoroughly, they were not expecting to find anything dramatic. Months had already passed since Ping disappeared, and if Zhang had been involved in the crime, he had likely had plenty of time to remove anything that could connect him to it. Yet sometimes the smallest pieces of evidence are the most revealing. Inside a storage corner of the house, officers discovered a length of rope. At first glance, it looked like nothing more than an ordinary farming tool, the type commonly used by villagers for tying bundles of crops or securing heavy objects. But one detective noticed something that seemed strangely familiar about it. The rope had a very specific pattern in the weave. When the investigators compared it to the rope that had been wrapped around Ping's body, the similarity was striking. The thickness, the material, even the way the fibers had aged over time appeared nearly identical. While rope like this was not entirely rare in rural areas, finding such a close match inside the home of their primary suspect immediately raised serious questions. The rope was sent to a forensic laboratory for detailed examination. Under microscopic analysis, technicians compared the fibers from Zhang's rope with fibers recovered from the rope used to bind the body. The results revealed multiple matching characteristics in the structure and composition of the strands. While the evidence alone could not conclusively prove they came from the exact same piece, the probability that two ropes with such similar properties would appear in both places by coincidence was extremely low. Investigators now had something they had lacked before: a physical connection. When Zhang Lim was brought in for questioning again, detectives presented the forensic findings calmly, allowing the silence in the room to grow heavier as he listened. At first, he continued repeating the same explanations he had offered before. He insisted that the rope found in his house had nothing to do with the one used to tie the body. But as the questioning continued, the pressure slowly began to build. Detectives carefully walked him through the timeline once more. The visit to Ping's house, the strange warning phone call to Zhao Chengkui, the witnesses who had seen him nearby on the night she disappeared, and finally the rope found in his home. Piece by piece, the story began to close in around him. For hours, Zhang maintained his denial, yet investigators could see the tension building in his posture. His answers became shorter, less confident. At times, he avoided eye contact entirely. Then, sometime late in the interrogation, the resistance finally broke. Zhang lowered his head and quietly admitted that he had been inside Ping's house on the night she disappeared. According to his confession, the two of them had indeed known each other for many years. Their relationship had grown complicated over time, shifting between friendship and something more intimate whenever he returned to the village from his work elsewhere. On the evening of September 24th, he had gone to visit her again, believing they would spend time together as they had in the past. But the situation did not unfold the way he expected. During their conversation inside the house, Ping reportedly told him that she wanted to end their relationship. She said she was tired of the secrecy and no longer wanted to continue meeting him behind her husband's back. For Zhang, who had apparently developed strong feelings for her, the rejection was sudden and humiliating. What began as an argument quickly escalated. Zhang claimed that Ping threatened to reveal their relationship to Zhao Qinghui if he continued bothering her. In the heat of the moment, anger overtook him. The argument grew louder, the emotions more intense. And then, according to Zhang, he lost control. He admitted that he grabbed her by the neck during the struggle. At first, he insisted that he had not intended to kill her, that he had only wanted to silence her. But as the pressure continued, Ping eventually stopped moving. When he realized what had happened, panic set in. Instead of calling for help, Zhang made a decision that would seal his fate. Over the next several hours, he worked alone to hide the crime. He used rope from his home to bind the body and dragged it to the abandoned well not far from the village. There, he tied a large stone to ensure the body would sink and disappear beneath the water. But even after disposing of the body, fear continued to follow him. Days later, worried that Zhao Qinghui might start asking questions, Zhang made the strange phone call that investigators would later find so suspicious. His intention had been to plant the idea that Ping might run away with another man. If Zhao believed that story, Zhang hoped the disappearance might never be investigated seriously. For a while, it seemed to work. The case stalled for months, drifting into uncertainty as time passed. But the well that Zhang believed would hide the crime forever ultimately became the place where the truth resurfaced. When the villagers discovered the body 7 months later, the investigation restarted with new urgency, slowly rebuilding the events of that September night. In the end, it was not a single dramatic clue that exposed the killer. It was the accumulation of many small details: the suspicious phone call, the witness who remembered seeing him near the house, the rope hidden inside his home, and the forensic evidence that survived months beneath freezing water. Together, those pieces revealed the story that Zhang had tried so hard to bury. A moment of rage, a desperate attempt to conceal the crime, and a secret that remained hidden at the bottom of a village well for more than half a year before finally coming to light.